We're very, very proud to have Jason speak to us this morning, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Michael pinned me down and basically said, what's your talk going to be called? And originally when he asked me, I said, well, I'm not sure. Let me think about it for a bit. Then he got back to me, and I had to come up with something right there on the instant, so I came out with why the alt-right isn't right. And I think the first thing we need to do is let's define terms here. What are we talking about here with the alt-right? Because I think there's really two different alt-rights. If you grabbed your Mary Daily Journal this morning, I kind of teased it around town, and I told John Galooly, I said, I think there's a small group within, and I don't even want to say within the alt-right, who's attached itself to the alt-right, who calls itself the alt-right, and it's not really the alt-right. The alt-right, as a term, came around 2008, and what used to be called a group that called itself paleo-conservatives. And I guess paleo-conservative sounded too fossilized as sort of a marketing term, so it was rebranded as the alt-right. And and most of the ideas are fairly mainstream. In fact, most people in this room, myself included, believe in some of these paleo-conservative ideas. Border security. I mean, my goodness, that's a no-brainer. That we have laws that should be upheld and protected. My wife's an immigrant. We had to go through the immigration process. We had to pay thousands of dollars to the federal government to go from visa to green card and green card to citizenship. So, and she's not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of legal immigrants who come to this country every year who go through this process. And to say someone gets to jump in line because they jumped the border is not racist, because we're not saying that, well, we'll allow certain people to jump the border but not others. We're saying if you jump the border, it doesn't matter if you're Canadian or Mexican, you have to follow our laws. I think that's an idea. In fact, I know polls show us that's an idea that most Americans agree with. The idea that Ron Paul championed on auditing the Federal Reserve, well, we should audit any governmental organization from time to time, especially one that deals with our monetary system. I don't think that's all right. I don't think that's wacko. I don't think that's out of the mainstream. I think most people will logically see that as normal. And a lot of these things are debatable. Should we go back to pegging the dollar to gold or silver versus fiat? Those are legitimate monetary questions and philosophies on monetary policy that are not outside the mainstream. They're debatable. So, but we have this group, the Nazis, the white supremacists, the KKK, that have attached itself to the alt-right. And the reason they've done is they've looked at some of these things and they say, oh, we agree with them. But there's a difference here. Now, I would say these groups are right-wing, but only if you consider the European definition of right-wing. In Europe, your right-wing groups are ones that believe in totalitarianism. Your left-wing groups, in theory and on paper, never in practice, believe in ultimate rule of the people. That's why the Soviet Union is well, not the Soviet Union, but most communist countries had Democrat in the name. The German Democratic Republic. On paper, communism is the rule of the proletariat. It's the rule of the massive amount of people. In actuality, it's the rule of the Communist Party and usually the absolute rule of the General Secretary of the Communist Party. On paper, the far right is totalitarianism. It's the rule of the dictator. Which actually means the far right sounds a lot like the actual practice of the far left, but that's semantics. So in the United States, what we have is the left wing believes in more government. They believe in centralizing power. And the further left you go, the more centralized it gets, until you get to that one-party rule and then to the General Secretary of that party, who is an absolute authority. On the right, we believe in diffusing power. We believe in the idea of the Republic. We believe in the idea of the Constitution. We believe in the ideas that are so well articulated in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers by the consent of the governed to protect these rights. That is the right wing of America. You cannot believe any group is superior or inferior and still believe that we are all created equal. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, that we're all created with equal abilities. We're not all born to the same station in life, but we are all equal under the law. That the law is there to protect the property of everyone, protect the rights of everyone. That's what equality means. And Republicans and conservatisms and the right wing, the legitimate right wing of the country, holds those truths. So the title was a play on words. Wobbly alt-right isn't right. They are not right wing, they are left wing. They're as left wing as the communists, as the people who walk around wearing Che Guevara t-shirts. Once again, no one in their right mind would walk around wearing a Hitler t-shirt. But the left wing walks around with the face of a man who killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Who wants to walk around, who would be willing to walk around with the face of a mass murderer than the left wing of America? Who would want to identify with the face of someone who killed people because they did not believe in his ideas of left-wing revolutionaryism, but the left wing of America? It goes to show right there, more than anything else, really what the left in this country is about. That you would walk around willingly as a proud leftist with the face of a mass murderer. Also, you see every once in a while, people with t-shirts with Chairman Mao on it. Let's talk about the 50 million people he murdered in the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution. So why is the alt-right, at least this part of the alt-right, not right? Because they're on the left. The media, however, is very willing to agree with their self-labelization. Because obviously they want to take this group that's latched on to us and say this is the entire right wing of the country. When the fact of the matter, it has nothing to do with the right wing of the country. David Duke, when he first ran for public office, ran as a Democrat. When he couldn't be elected as a Democrat, he tried to register and run as a Republican. The Louisiana Republican Party said, and by the way, for all of you who ever say, why doesn't the Republican Party tell people, no, you can't register to run because you're not really Republican? Because the Louisiana Republican Party told David Duke no, he sued them and a judge ordered them to let him on the ballot. After costing the Louisiana Republican Party, hundreds of thousands of lawyer fees, and then having to pay David Dukes. That's a very, very big warning shot to every Republican Party in the nation. That if you don't allow someone to register to run for office under your banner, then there's a good chance that you will be sued, and there's a good chance if you are that you are going to lose. So, in a sense, you let the people, you say, fine, we'll let the people decide. The problem is the media then says, well, the Republican Party let a member of the KKK run, and we're forever branded with it. So, the interesting thing is the Republican Party has time and time again tried to stop David Duke. When he ran for president in Georgia, the Republican Party tried to keep him off the ballot. Now you go to the left side of the aisle and you have the late Senator Robert Byrd, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, who was lauded at his funeral by every left-wing politician out there. Now here was someone who was an actual leader in the KKK, and Hillary Clinton called him an idol. Think about that for a second. The left wing can idolize grand wizards of the KKK and get complete pass by the media. We have a group that calls itself part of us, and the media accepts it lock, stock, and barrel and asks President Trump, what is he going to do about it? Now, the fact is, President Trump should condemn it. I should condemn them as Americans, not as Republicans, as Americans. Because this is left-wing ideology that is hostile to our Constitution and the protection under the law that we hold dear. That if you have a left-wing entity that wants to set up a dictatorship based on the ideas of hyphenated Americanism, You know, as Republicans, we reject hyphenated Americanism. We say we're all Americans. We don't put any qualifier after that. It's the left wing that wants to divide us into different groups, so, you know, a house divided cannot stand. So we have, in the old days, it was Irish Americans, Scottish Americans, Italian Americans, African Americans. Even Teddy Roosevelt, over 100 years ago, warned against hyphenated Americanism. Because once you start putting people in groups where we identify more with our group, whether it's a race, religion, creed, ethnicity, whatever, then the left can play to the passions of those groups and divide us as a people and conquer us. Because that's what it's all about. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're a part of a group, a part of a faith, part of a religion, that you shouldn't be proud of it. You know, I put on a kilt a couple times a year because I'm proud of my Scottish heritage.
Way to go, man.
Thank you.
I knew you were really a girl.
Exactly. My little plaid skirt, yes. The as manliest skirt you'd ever seen. I'm proud of our heritage. You know, the fact that I had received an invitation the other day to attend the Taste of Taiwan. You know, Taiwanese Americans, proud of their heritage, showing off what they bring to our American table in terms of food, in terms of culture, to showcase their heritage where they came from. You know, we do talk about the melting pot, that we all came from somewhere else. You know, on one side of my family, I'm a 13th generation American. My family has been here since the 1600s. We weren't on the Mayflower, and we weren't part of the first group that came to Jamestown, but we're on the second ship to Jamestown. All right. On the other side of my family, I'm second generation American. My grandparents are from the old country. So, and that's how a lot of us in America are. I have people who came here and fought in the Revolutionary War, direct ancestors, and then I have direct ancestors that came through Ellis Island a little more than 100 years ago. So, you know, it's being proud about heritage. It's not bad. Being proud of where you came from is not a bad thing, and no group is perfect. We all have bad things. We all have good things in our past. So I guess that's my little hinting way to bring up the topic of trying to erase history. And that is what's keeping the left wing live and active. Today I posted on Facebook that because of the media, we're letting about 3,000 people, probably less. I could not find an actual number count of how many people showed up in Charlottesville. So let's say about 3,000. Maybe it was 5,000. Maybe it was 10,000. We are a nation of 315 million people, and we're letting less than 10,000 people put our country in crisis. Less than 10,000 people, probably less than 3,000 people in one town. You see these protests around these statues. There's less than 100 people out of 315 million. But the media makes it look like the whole country's burning down. When the fact is, you double the size of the number of people in the room, and that's the average size of these protests. This country is not divided, but the media has to make us think we're divided hopelessly in order to attack the President of the United States, in order to sell newspapers, get viewers, get people to log in. Because at the end of the day, conflict sells. These are corporations. They are corporations that have stockholders, and stockholders demand that a profit be made because of dividends. Profit's not bad. I'm a stockholder in GE. GE owns NBC. But the fact of the matter is, the CEOs with their multi-million-dollar salaries, if they don't perform, will be voted out by the shareholders and the board of directors. So the question that comes down to is, what is the responsibility? We talked about getting to the truth. And Cindy can kind of say, both of us are lawyers. You've done a lot more court work than I am. I'm a corporate attorney, so luckily I don't have to go to court. But you have two people on the stand. You have the defense and you have the prosecution, or you have two sides in a civil case, and more so two sides in a civil case. One person saying one thing, one person saying the other. Somewhere in the middle is the truth. And we all filter things through our own lenses. We all filter them through our own prejudice. We all filter them through our own experiences. And sometimes we are blessed to know and hold the absolute truth in a situation. But we don't always. And sometimes the other side does. The difference is, and I think probably everyone in this room grew up with the same philosophy I did. I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend to my life your right to say it. There is no right against offense. In fact, the best way to deal with free speech that you don't like is add more free speech that you do like. It gets harder when there are people who control the avenues of free speech. Really, I can stand up on the stage at the Marietta Square and shout to my heart's content, but I'm only going to reach a handful of people. I post something on social media, I could potentially reach, without people sharing, 4,000 people. If they share, it's almost limitless. If it quote, goes viral. But there are gatekeepers. And there are always gatekeepers. The only way you get around gatekeepers is having more voices than they do. Tearing down statues is not going to heal any wound that's 150 years old. Building new statues won't heal any wound that's 150 years old. But what it does is it keeps the left wing in this country agitated, active, and engaged. So when it comes time to election, they know where their activists are. They know the people to go door to door. They know the workers who will stuff envelopes, lick stamps, or I guess you don't have to lick stamps anymore. But peel stamps and paste them, and will work to get the message out. The problem is their message is becoming increasingly acknowledged by a smaller and smaller and smaller amount of Americans. Donald Trump's election was a perfect example. There is a silent majority in this country. A silent majority who does not show up at statues for or against them. A silent majority that simply wants to do their job, to provide for their families, to pay their mortgage, and to participate in society. Silent majority voted Donald Trump in. It wasn't the racist element that calls itself the alt-right. It was good Americans, hardworking Americans, who 8 years before were promised hope and change, and found out that the hope and change they were given was to make things worse for themselves. That the hope and change was not a change in a path that they thought we were on the wrong path. You look at polls in 2008, people said the country's on the wrong path. Vast majority of them. A lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats, a lot of independents wanted a change in the path. So they voted for that in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and a lot of other places. But 8 years afterwards, they realized that the path that they were put on was also the wrong path. It wasn't the path they expected. And they voted for Donald Trump, who brought us back to putting America first. We will make America great again. Donald Trump didn't come up with that slogan. He's a good businessman. He knows when to use a good slogan. I don't know if Ronald Reagan came up with that slogan, but the two buttons I have from 1980 say "Make America Great Again." And the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump is in many ways doing just that.
Yeah.
All this stuff that we're seeing on TV, masks what's going on. In the last 2 weeks, China has reversed its policy on North Korea. Since the Korean War, China has said, if you do anything against North Korea, you're declaring war on us. They've said that to the West constantly. It didn't matter if we started or North Korea started it. About 2 weeks ago, thanks to negotiation of President Trump and his team, China changed course a bit. They said, okay, United States, if you do a preemptive strike against North Korea, it's the equivalent of declaring war against us. But if North Korea does something first, you have our blessing to take them out.
You gotta love caveat.
Do you know what kind of sea change that is? North Korea has been a problem, well, it's a nuclear problem through Clinton, through Bush, through Obama. Those three presidents, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, none of them were able to do anything about it. Donald Trump goes in and makes a change. And you saw how quickly Kim Jong-un quieted down. That should be front page news. But instead, it's a few hundred people in Charlotte that is dividing the nation. Because because Donald Trump is not allowed to do anything right in the eyes of the media and in the eyes of quite a few number of Republicans, unfortunately. So instead, the media goes on to the next thing. You know, I posted to, we have a small little chat group among the officers, so we can discuss volunteer and things going on in the headquarters and all that kind of stuff. And obviously Jim's on that. But I posted to it a little bit of a script a couple days ago. And basically the script was, media, President Trump, are you going to condemn the white supremacists in Charlottesville? And Trump says, I condemn the white supremacists. Media, will you strongly condemn the white supremacists in Charlottesville? President Trump, I just said I condemn them. Media headline, Donald Trump refuses to strongly condemn white supremacists in Charlottesville. Followed up by Mitch McConnell saying, it's so unfortunate our president's a racist, but that's what it is. It's those gotcha games that the successes of this administration are not heralded. It is whatever failures that the media can conceive, by which they can sell newspapers, get viewers, and get clicks on the internet. All which to put in a report to say to advertisers, if you advertise with us, this is how many viewers we receive, this is how many clicks we get, or this is how many newspapers we have in circulation. The old joke is, I always kind of remember when there was such a thing as sweeps weeks. When the few people who had Nelson rating boxes got to be counted. And especially in the local news, that was always the apartment fire every single day because you had to get the viewership up. Or all the stories about how your drinking water is going to kill you in 3 days. So you would tune in those 3 days to see how your drinking water was going to kill you on day 3. That was the insanity of sweeps weeks. And it was all to get viewers, to tell advertisers, we have more viewers than the station next door. You advertise with us, you'll get more customers. And it's the same thing today. So why is the alt-right not right? Because it's left. And we should acknowledge that it's left. We should be the first people saying that it's left. Once again, the only way to drown out the voices is by more voices. Anyone who wants to establish a totalitarian system in the United States, a rule of a dictator or oligarchy based on dividing Americans and conquering them, is not right-wing. It is not conservative. It's not Republican. It's not libertarian. It is the far left. And we should say so. And we should acknowledge so. Doesn't mean we shouldn't condemn that behavior. In fact, we should condemn that behavior even more. But not as Republicans, not as libertarians, not as Democrats, but as Americans. Because it's hostile to our way of life. It's hostile to our Constitution. It's hostile to our Declaration of Independence. Because you can't say we're all created equal. that were endowed with certain inalienable rights, and then tried to take those rights away. With that, I'll open the floor up to questions.
And as we do, we start from one end of the room and go to the other. So we're going to start on this side, and move up here and down. And Jason, you call on the numbers. Okay, since you are in the.
Okay.
So move it up the table. Johnny.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
The ballot access to get on as a Republican candidate, since the primaries are paid for by the government, the government pays for the primaries, the taxpayers pay for the primaries, doesn't that mean that they have some responsibility to give people access to the ballot? Because if the party controls who gets onto the ballot, aren't you depriving anyone from getting onto the ballot?
In theory, well, there's also the reason you pay a qualifying fee is supposedly to help defer the cost of the actual election. It doesn't anymore, but the idea was there was that, but there was also freedom of association, the First Amendment. Does the Republican Party have a greater right to freely associate with who it wants to associate, or is there a greater right for an individual to be able to qualify for elected office in the manner they want to associate with? And the courts have basically said the candidate's right trumps the right of the party.
Didn't the Democrats keep the LaRouche people off the ballot at some point?
Well, I got a better story. Right here in Cobb County. Back in a lot of you will remember this once I start telling it. Back in the 2000 elections, when Roy Barnes had drawn his multi-member districts and all that kind of stuff. Well, no, I think may have been before that. No, it was before that. They would redraw them in the next year after the census. So Roy Barnes was doing his best to, obviously, like any leader would, get more members in the House of Representatives. And unbeknownst to anyone, he had secretly made a deal with Republican State Representative Randy Sauer. Randy had been a state representative in the Smyrna area for a number of years as a Republican. He was an attorney and close friends with Roy Barnes, both being attorneys in Cobb County. In 2000, Randy Sauer qualified to run for re-election as a Republican. As you expect, it's very hard to find people to primary candidates, so no Republican qualified against him. A small business owner from Smyrna named Doug Stoner went to qualify for office against Randy Sauer. When he got over to the Democrat side of the Capitol when they're doing qualifying, the Democrat Party of Georgia refused to accept his qualifying check. They would not allow him to qualify as a Democrat. On Friday, Randy Sauer shows back up. He pulls his registration and qualifying fee from the Republican Party, walks over to the air chamber, and qualifies to run as a Democrat. No opposition.
Yeah, but we got together, what was her name?
Ginger Collins.
Ginger Collins.
We collected signatures.
Throughout the summer,
Yeah.
and we beat Randy Sauer.
But, exactly. Well, we beat him in the run. I was Ginger's campaign consultant. So, this is part of the reason I know her, is I was running Ginger's campaign. But Doug Stoner did, so we all went out and we got signatures to get her on the ballot. And she had to be on the ballot as independent, not as a Republican.
Exactly.
Doug Stoner did the same thing. So he was the independent Democrat, Ginger was the independent Republican, and then you had the Democrat Randy Sauer. Doug took enough votes to force it into a runoff. And then Doug endorsed Ginger. In fact, we were talking, and I think Anthony Scott Hobbs was part of this as well a little bit. We were trying to get Doug, as screwed over Doug was by the Democrat Party, we really wanted to, most of his beliefs tend to be more aligned with Republicans than Democrats anyway, so we're trying to get him to come over and officially become a Republican. Obviously didn't happen, he became a Democrat state senator. But that was one example. Of course.
But at the runoff, we could tell people that Ginger was a Republican.
Yes.
And it was a very positive response. The first time around, we just had to say she was running.
Mm-hmm.
But the second time, we could say she's running as a Republican, and the response was overwhelming.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful campaign.
She got more votes in the runoff than she did in the first round. The other thing that we had working for us, and I stuck this on every mail piece I put out for her during the runoff, the recount in Florida with the hanging chads was going on at the same time. So we had people showing up basically because they're ticked off at Al Gore and the Democrats in Palm Beach voting for Ginger, and just the dirty tricks of the Democrats, which Randy Souder was a dirty trick of the Democrats. So I mean, but Doug never sued.
Jason, what
So-
effect would having a closed primary in Georgia eliminate a lot of this mischief? In other words, when you register to vote, you would register under a major party or an independent. And then you can only vote in that party's primary. Pennsylvania, Michigan, they all have that.
Yeah, Florida has it. I mean, I don't know if the majority of states have it, but it seems to me that every time I hear about more states with closed primaries and open primaries, I don't know if that would eliminate that mischief. Once again, you're dealing with the party still controls the primary, whether it's open or closed. The difference is you would have a lot less Republicans in DeKalb County voting in Democrat primaries. You'd have a lot less Democrats in Cobb County voting in Republican primaries. Because, in Cobb County, unless there's some major race going on, for the most part, if you're a Democrat that lives in East Cobb, if you don't vote in a Republican primary, you have absolutely no say in who your elected official is. Republicans in DeKalb County were able to knock out Cynthia McKinney in a Democrat primary. It means you have a lot of you have a lot of Republican Party leaders with Democrat primary voting records on their voting record. But then again, at the time of that election, I was actually a voter in DeKalb County, and I still couldn't pull Democrat ballots in the primary. It was just too distasteful to me. But I didn't blame anyone else who did. So. Anyone? That?
Yeah, no, I disagree with that philosophy. When I lived in Florida, I had to register as a Democrat because there weren't any Republicans.
Right.
And if I had registered as a Republican, I would not have been able to vote in local elections.
Right.
But I was able to vote for the Republican candidate for president. So I think an open vote, just don't register as anything, which gives everybody a lot more freedom to vote their consciences or what they think is the better person.
Right.
And otherwise, it would leave the independents out totally.
Right.
So I don't think that's a very good idea.
Well, even Neil Borch said after he moved to Florida, he had to register as a Republican so he could vote in local elections. He'd always been a libertarian. So.
Well, they did
like I said,
change after I left Florida, then they opened it up, but I came up where the Republicans are.
Right. So, but there's good arguments on both sides and there's bad arguments on both sides. I tend to lean towards allowing the people to have as big a voice as possible.
The more open it is, the more freedom there is.
Right.
Because it gives us a chance to explain our position, our candidates to people who might, that guy who spoke at that Saturday meeting, concentrate on the swing vote.
Right.
That was like a revelation to me, for the district that I come from. That gives us a chance to persuade these people, to talk to them, and that's what it's all about.
We have to go
If you
around.
want-
Frank, we have to go around. You've already had your cue.
Oh.
How much time we got?
I have to have a hard stop at 10, so we got 25 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So.
I do have a question, but I would like to comment on that last topic, and I think I like Frank's idea about Democrat, Republican, Independent, because it seems that the majority of those who do vote are independents. And of course, if the state of Georgia all the time was electing independents, we could play Democrats against Republicans, get everything we want. But anyway, in getting back to local party politics, can you think of some legal reason why a local political party, be it Democrat or Republican, should not establish some method of holding elected officials accountable for their conduct. By that I mean this: if a citizen finds out that a commissioner or a sheriff or whoever is involved in something shady, in Cobb County right now, unless you happen to be her, you're not going to get to the grand jury and let them know about it. But the local party should have enough influence, enough standing to get past the gatekeeper up there at the courthouse and get to the grand jury and say, we have a problem with one of our elected officials and we'd appreciate it if y'all look at it. Is there any reason why a Democrat or Republican party should not have that kind of internal organization, someplace where a citizen could go other than the courthouse to complain about malfeasance or improper conduct on the part of public officials?
Well, I mean, it personally, my opinion is any citizen should have that ability. Got into a little bit of discussion of corporations being people, and that before we started this part, and that would kind of go to it is the party a person? Should the party have more rights than a single individual to do that? The problem with holding elected officials accountable, it's the equivalent of your mother scolding you at the age of 25. She can say it, but there's nothing she can really do anything about it. Maybe cut you out of the will, disown you, or something like that. But we don't even have that power as a party. We can't tell them, if you do this stuff, we're not going to allow you to run for re-election as a Republican. Louise, thank you, David Duke. The only thing that we could do, potentially, is get enough voters together to defeat them at the ballot box. The problem is, a lot of you have been to our Cobb GOP breakfasts. We max out about 250. If you use Sheriff Neil Warren as the absolute high water mark of Republican votes in Cobb County, there are 179,000 Republican voters in Cobb County. If you use Donald Trump as the high water mark to say these are the absolute Republicans, there's 159,000 Republican voters in Cobb County versus about 250 at a breakfast. Now, if you got me 15,000 Cobb GOP, active GOP members, then yeah, we could probably scare a few elected officials. But we don't have that. We don't have that number. We've never had that number. The problem is the party is 1%. The active party members are 1% of the active Republican vote. That means they don't have to appeal to the 1%. They have the 99% who doesn't show up to breakfasts, who don't come to mass precinct meetings, who don't come to 4th of July barbecues. That's where the problem comes in. How can the party better influence? They don't need the money from the party. We can only donate the same amount as any citizen. We have a cap for every candidate. On the federal level, we can't do anything unless we become a federal PAC and have to subject ourselves to the whims and wills of the Federal Election Commission. In Cobb County, I have overhead that's about $1,500 a month that I have to fundraise for. In addition to that, we try to give money to candidates as well. But there's no way I can run unless I can raise another about $300,000 a direct mail campaign. And party rules would prohibit that from focusing on candidates in a primary. So our hands are tied through a number of different channels. That the only way that we can actually do it and really affect the elected officials is to exponentially grow our active membership. Now, when we can't hold a breakfast in that building because 500, 600, 1,000 people show up for a regular breakfast, then things will start changing. So I don't really need the 15,000. But basically I need everyone to bring 10 people. 10 new people. And that's how you affect it. And same thing on the Democrat side. You know, if in terms of money, an incumbent Republican can go to a lobbyist. You know, they're not going to go to the party. They're not going to go to the people. And they'll use that money to overwhelm their opponent who has less resources to draw upon with direct mail, with phone calls, with advertisements, and everything else. Because at the end of the day, money equals speech. I've ran for office. I've had to do it. Cindy's ran for office. You've had to do it. Michael's ran for office. We all know exactly. I think I saw something on Facebook about Tom beginning to run for office. I don't know.
Been running for office for about 10 hours.
10 hours. Okay, congratulations. If you don't know this already, you will find it out. So, that's a fact of the matter. And sometimes it doesn't work. But once again, there are ways around it. You can have almost $1 million to send direct mail, like Tim Lee had. But you got 300 volunteers like Mike Boyce who will knock him out. Deborah?
My next.
Yes, or
Going down the
oh.
I have a question to get answered before I ask my question. Where was this case about where we were forced? Oh, that was in Louisiana, wasn't it? Okay. Since there's an independent party, why would they force the Democrat Party or the Republican Party to accept a candidate if they can run as an independent?
I don't know. I mean, part of it is the major parties have automatic ballot access.
Say that again?
The major parties, the Democrat and Republican Party, have automatic ballot access. To get on the ballot as an independent, you have to collect signatures. You have to collect a lot of signatures.
Okay.
And you have to collect a lot of signatures that are verifiable. And the number goes up more and more depending on the race, what the race is. You know, a smaller local race with less, it's always a percentage of the voters. So if you're in an area, you know, your voting block is, say, 15,000 voters, then you will have to get, usually 1 to 3% is what most states say.
Could he run for the Libertarian Party? It's just that he wanted to run for the Republican.
They don't necessarily have, especially if you have to think back, this is late 80s as well. The Libertarian Party doesn't necessarily have automatic ballot access in every state, especially back then. Now, Louisiana is weird in the sense that they have open primaries. Every election for them is like the Georgia 6th Congressional District was. That doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, what have you, everyone jumps in and the top 2 vote getters go on to the runoff. And that could be a Republican Democrat, that could be a Republican or Republican, that could be a Democrat Republican. And it usually works out as a Democrat Republican. But once again, in theory, a Libertarian could get it, an Independent could get it. It's just everyone runs. You know, we had a couple of independents in the Georgia 6. We had a small handful of Democrats, and we had an infinite number of Republicans to choose from. So, you know, there's a good debate on whether or not we should run our elections like that. Let's eliminate primaries. Let's throw everyone in, and I make the same I make the same face when people suggest that to me. You know, but it eliminates sort of the issue of ballot access, in the sense that it enables more people to, regardless of a party affiliation, minor parties, third parties, you know, independents, to be able to participate in the process. Now, the interesting thing is, even with that, you don't get libertarian statewide elected officials in Louisiana or independent statewide elected officials. In fact, the only place that you tend to get that is Minnesota, which Minnesota doesn't have a runoff law. So if you get the majority, if you get the plurality of the vote, you get it, which is how someone like an independent like Jesse Ventura can be elected governor in that state. So we can also see the results of that, doing it that way too. But Jesse Ventura was elected by barely over 1/3 of the population. It's just his little over 1/3 beat the little under 1/3 of the Republican and Democrat.
We're still on this side of the room? Okay.
All right.
Jerry.
I'd like to just bring something up. Several people have asked me about this week. The statue thing. All right. I learned through going through some political activist training with AFP that the issue is never the issue.
All right.
The issue is always to split, fracture conservatives and independents. And they bring next week it could be women's rights, but it'll be something next week. Last week, we project with the Russian. It's all this is designed to fracture the party and to fracture the independents. So the issue is never the issue. That's why I tell people that don't worry about the statues. They've been here for 100 or more years. Listen to the news media and see what they're really selling.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not the statues. I mean, I've had people ask about the statues. I said, guys, it'll be something else next week. Forget the statues. Know what's going on. That's what I tell people.
My personal opinion on the statues, if it's a statue of a politician, I have no problem with it going down. If it's a statue of a soldier, I have a big problem with it going down. I have a big problem. Most of those were put up when the veterans of the Civil War were starting to die out. And, I'm a member of one of the Civil War heritage groups. The one that's a smaller group in states like Georgia. But it doesn't mean that because my great-great-grandfather came down in blue, that we don't recognize the fact that a lot of good-hearted people who had no interest in the politics both volunteered and, what's more, many, many, many more were drafted, both in the South and the North. And back then, you couldn't flee to Canada because number got called in the draft. And the penalty for evading a draft was the same as the penalty for desertion. You were shot or you were hanged. So the issue was you could either go fight on the front lines or you can be shot or hanged. I don't see that as really much of a choice. And if these people who are tearing down statues or want them gone, Republicans, Democrats, what have you, if they understood their history, if they understood that a lot of people had no choice, and a lot more people were fighting for ideas, not so someone else can own a slave, because they didn't have any, that these were the monuments to the people who are dying out. You can find on YouTube the video, just after the era of silent film was gone, of a reunion of Gettysburg veterans, where they reenacted Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. And once they got to the fence, hands were outstretched. When I was in school, I learned the Civil War is brother versus brother. Do you treat your brother that way? That's what the Civil War was about. This tore up families. And these were to try to heal wounds. Now, all these left-wing groups are sitting there saying, let's open a wound that's 150 years old.
Yeah.
Let's reopen it. A 150-year-old wound. Yeah. This is what America needs, to reopen a 150-year-old wound. Now, America isn't perfect. But the thing is, America has continued to evolve. No nation on earth has gotten it right. No people on earth has gotten it right. There's been no group, no nation, nothing in history where you haven't had civilizations that did things wrong. The question is, are we going to learn from it and move forward? Or are we going to forget the lessons of the past and repeat them over and over and over and over again? Michael.
Jason, the left would have us to believe that the Civil War was all about slavery. Could you tell us the top 1, 2, or 3 reasons Civil War, so-called Civil War, was initiated?
I have gone through and I have read the succession petitions, resolutions that were passed in all the southern states. Most of them are very brief. They simply say, we are no longer, in a nutshell, we're no longer part of the United States. We don't recognize the federal government. So no reasoning behind it, nothing else. A few others will talk about the election of Lincoln Hamilton, his first vice president. But that's it. They'll sit, and it'll be one sentence about it. The rest state categorically it's because of slavery. That categorically because of slavery. These are the actual petitions. I can pull them up and read them. If it's on state rights, it's the state's rights, and they say slavery in some form or fashion, whether our fellow slave states or something like that. That's what the politicians wanted. Once you get past, the ones I mentioned slavery are Georgia, South Carolina, I think North Carolina, maybe Virginia. It's actually not a majority. It's not a majority of the southern states. Like I said, majority basically say, that's it, we're gone. And they really don't give a reason. And most of it was, you had a lot of the southern states in Confederacy that were kind of taking a wait and see approach. The last state to leave was Tennessee, and they left pretty late in '61. So I think, so really a lot of them were waiting till after Lincoln was actually inaugurated. Keep in mind, inauguration was in March, it wasn't in January. So the first few states, South Carolina, a few others, had left.
That was January when they, a couple of them.
Yeah.
January before the inauguration.
Right, so a couple. So a lot of them did leave in reaction to Lincoln sending in troops. I think there was one of them, and I can't remember which state. It may have been Arkansas. That kind of mentioned that. No, Missouri stayed. But you have to keep in mind, Missouri's a good example. Kentucky and Maryland are good examples. You had officers in the Union Army who were slave owners. You had officers in the Confederate Army, Robert E. Lee, as a perfect example, who were not slave owners. Robert E. Lee was charged by his late father-in-law to free all of his late father-in-law's slaves. His father-in-law died in 1857. In order to administer the will, the last slave freed by Robert E. Lee was in 1862. And the reason was Robert E. Lee's father-in-law said that his daughters would get a certain amount of money. So the money actually wasn't there when the will was probated. So the court basically said the slaves cannot be freed until that money is made up, which meant they had to provide basically 5 more years of slave labor. And the court actually cut it off. It said, if the money isn't made up in 5 years, it doesn't matter at that point. The will says these slaves are to be freed. They should have been freed immediately. We're giving you 5 years. So Lee freed the last slaves in 1862 while serving as the head of the Army of Northern Virginia. So here he is fighting for the South while freeing the last of the slaves that his late father-in-law owned. There's record, I think, that his mother, I think it was his mother, willed him in her will a slave named Nancy and her children. And Lee freed them too. Now, Ulysses S. Grant also was in a similar situation. His father-in-law in Missouri, a slave state, had slaves that were basically given or will, I think his father-in-law was still alive, so given to his wife. Law in Missouri was that the husband couldn't do anything with his wife's property without her permission. Somehow, during that time period, Grant personally came in possession of a slave. We don't know if it was basically given to him by his father-in-law or his brother-in-law, who was in the military serving out west. But Grant also did the same thing. In his own hand, he wrote the petition freeing his slaves. And this was long before the Civil War, or War of Northern Aggression, or the War of Southern Rebellion, or whatever you want to call it. But the fact of the matter is, it was complicated. You look at Nathan Bedford Forrest, cavalry. After the Civil War, he starts the Ku Klux Klan. Ku Klux Klan starts becoming violent. He wanted to be basically an association of Civil War veterans. It starts becoming violent. He leaves it, denounces it, spends the rest of his life giving speeches on racial reconciliation, on the fact that freed slaves were equal in rights to their former owners, and that we all need to work together, live together, and not try to oppress each other. That the black man is now my brother. Spent the rest of his life doing that. He dies, he's buried in a park in Memphis, Tennessee. During the first round of this, the city council of Memphis was saying, let's dig up him and his wife.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
The reason is they are turning people. We are all complicated people. We all have contradictions. We all have hypocrisies. We all have great virtues. But these are turning these people into one-dimensional caricature, not even characters, caricatures that they're trying to redefine based on maybe one thing written, one incident in their life, or one wrong decision they made. And they ignore, people like Robert E. Lee. And he said himself, don't build any memorials to me. He did more than anyone else in the Confederacy to try to heal the Union after the Civil War. While everyone was shouting, charge this man with treason, Lincoln, Grant, Sherman, and a heck of a lot of other people, a prominent, said no. So in other words, these people trying to tear down a Lee statue because he committed treason are disagreeing with Lincoln, Grant, and Sherman.
Yeah, but they did take away the Custis house.
Yeah.
Jason, what should be done about Stone Mountain and the monument
Oh.
in Chisholm? And Stacey Abrams, Democratic candidate, who's coming after me, wants to chisel it off. What should be done?
It's a work of art. What we forget is a lot of these things are works of art. They're sculptures. They were put together by an artist. They weren't manufactured in some shop in China. Workers being paid, $1 an hour. There were some craftsmen who worked these out. Now, am I allowed to go tear down every piece of art that I find offensive? There are a lot of sculptures out there that, people. I remember John Ashcroft. When he became Attorney General of the United States, he was mocked because he put a sheet over the topless statue of, I think it was Justice in the thing, because she was topless. And he was offended by a topless statue. He didn't tear it down, he put a sheet over it. And he was mocked because here's a statue in a public, it's inside the building, but still a public building, public place, that he found a little uncomfortable and he was mocked by it. Well, given today's standards, he should have knocked that thing down, shattered it on the floor. Because apparently that's what you're supposed to do to art. Now, Stacey Abrams wants to raise some money because you have to remember the money had to be raised. I have 3 Stone Mountain half dollars. They're minted in 1925.
Yes, they had a hard time.
And they had a very hard time raising the money to get it finished. Let Stacey Abrams raise the money, and there's a blank side, and let her put a monument to the abolitionists. Let her put a monument to Martin Luther King. Let her put whatever she wants to on it. Because once again, if you're offended by something, the way to do it is not to suppress speech, it's more speech. So if she wants to pay to have on the opposite side of Robert E. Lee, and it can raise some millions of dollars of cost to chisel out Harriet Tubman, which she wouldn't because Tubman was a Republican, Frederick Douglass, which she won because Douglas was a Republican.
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln, because which she won because Lincoln's a Republican.
Even the Democrats love
And
it.
even Martin Luther King Jr. for a while was a Republican. His father definitely was a Republican for a long time. Martin Luther King Jr. was a good politician. When he realized that he had to switch parties to get the Civil Rights Bill signed by LBJ, he did.
But if she wants to destroy it, then she can come up with the money to pay back all the descendants of the people that gave money. I mean, they really toughed it out. I think
Right.
it was during the Depression, wasn't it, or close to it?
Well, 1925. Yeah, during the Depression, I think it was. So, with interest. And that is 10 o'clock, and I need to head to community service event that the Cobb GOP is hosting. So, with that, thank you all for your time. I appreciate the discussion.